So welcome everybody. We don't have quite as many people on this second meeting, but it's lovely to see you all, or as many of you as I can see. I just realised how remiss it was of me at our first meeting, which for me was last night. I didn't actually introduce myself. So I'm Zoe. I'm the Executive Director of JBI, and I have been given the great privilege of presenting to all of you again today on behalf of Carla Suarez-Weiser, who is the Editor-in-Chief at Cochrane, and Will Moy, who is the CEO of Campbell, who are both joining us today as well. So this is the third community meeting that we've had in relation to this initiative, the Building a Global Evidence Synthesis Community Initiative, very long name. And so we thought it was really good time to give you a bit of an update on where we are up to. But Will said, but Zoe, you've still got to be inspiring. Can't just update people on process. So, and poor Will and Carla, it's like Groundhog Day when you do these meetings. You get to hear me even say the same jokes twice. So here's my attempt at inspiration, which I don't actually think is particularly hard to do with this initiative, because we really do have a once in a lifetime, certainly for people like me, once in a lifetime opportunity to reimagine the global evidence synthesis community for the next generation. And I think that speaks for itself, right? It's a really exciting thing opportunity for us to have before us. And so Will and Carla and I are very excited to be working on this with all of you. We did think, though, that it was important for us to preface the conversation with a few statements, and that is that it is very, very rare for a funder like the Wellcome Trust to devote funding for a group like us to determine how funding will be distributed in future. So very unique, very special, but as all funders do, they determine the timelines. And so we are working to a very tight, externally predetermined timeline, which sees us finishing this process next June. The reason that it's really important for me to say that is that what I'm going to present to you today is ambitious. And so there's a program of work that Will and Carla and I have designed together. We spent about a week together in London a couple of weeks ago in a windowless room in London, and we think we've come up with something that is pragmatic and achievable. And we're still all friends at the end of it. So I think that in itself was a win. It doesn't look perfect, and we had to make a lot of compromises, even just amongst the three of us, to try and come up with a process that we thought would work. There are parts of this proposed process that still require some thinking through and refining, and we are doing that in collaboration with other groups who are contributing to this process. And we are hoping to develop some more robust guidance, including some templates, and I think that's key. So rest assured, what I'm presenting is very high level, and we're hoping that we'll be putting together some more detailed guidance to support groups to deliver what we're asking. And we really wanted to reiterate that the idea is that this is a really inclusive process. We want as much diversity as possible, and at least one co-chair per group will be from the Global South. I think the other thing that I mentioned in the first meeting is that the language is also imperfect. So when we were in London, we had an Aussie, somebody from the UK, and somebody from Brazil. And then we did also meet with John Lavis, who's from Canada. And even just across those countries, we had some real challenges in coming up with language that would work across different cultures. And so I hope that the language that we've got in these slides is acceptable and understandable for everybody. But I apologise in advance if any of it is unclear. So the first thing that we did was have a really lengthy conversation about this idea of working groups and planning groups. The working groups are set in stone. The planning groups, I believe, came later in the conversation, and there were a couple of things that were nagging at us. The first is that when we did the open meetings, we didn't have a lot of interest from the community in joining those groups. And so that we thought was problematic. And we think that that's perhaps indicative of a couple of things. The first being that people's passion is for the things that are articulated in the working groups. But it also suggested to us that this is perhaps not the skill set of this community. And so it may be that we need to draw in other expertise that speaks to some of those very specific skill sets. The other issue, I suppose, for us was that a lot of the work of the planning groups is likely to be informed by what comes out of the working groups. So issues in relation to change management, for example, or monitoring, evaluation, and learning will be very difficult to determine until you know what changes need to be made, or you know what needs to be monitored or evaluated. So those programs of work will still go ahead, but it's likely that they will start at a later date. So what I'm presenting to you today is really focused on the working groups. We also thought it was important to clarify who the contributors are and what their roles are. We are now referring to ourselves as the facilitation group. There's really nothing about power or control here. We're just three people who recognised that there was an opportunity that really was going to need somebody to kickstart it. And it was going to need organisations that had a little bit of resource behind them, because at the moment, this is not funded. And so Carla and Will and myself are really just here to facilitate the process, make sure that it occurs in a structured way, in a meaningful way, so that we as a community can get the result that we want. Then there's the Building a Global Evidence Synthesis Community group, and that's really everybody on this call and the call previously. The United Nations Global SDG Synthesis Coalition is running a concurrent process that is focused on the demand side. So we are really all evidence synthesis producers, and that is the focus of our work in the working groups, and they will focus on demand side engagement. And then we have another group, Pace and Acres, who have volunteered to be the co-conveners on the consensus meeting. Again, this is reflective of the fact that we wanted to make sure that there was really Global South, and again, I apologise for that term, but it seems to be the term that everybody's using at the moment, but some Global South leadership. Lawrence and Rona are not involved in the facilitation group, and they haven't been involved in the design of this process. There may well be people from those groups, though, who put their names forward to participate in a working group. But at this stage, they are simply co-convening the consensus meeting in June. So I hope people can see this. Really, we've based our thinking around something called a double diamond design framework. And I've put a graphic there to help. It certainly helped us to get our heads around how this might work. And like I said in the previous meeting, I tend to use my hands a lot when I present. So, but hopefully you can see that the idea is that there is both divergence, so broad thinking, and then bringing the thinking in, narrowing our thinking and refining it. And that's the idea behind the double diamond process. So stage 1 and 2 focus on understanding and defining the existing evidence synthesis capabilities globally. And then stage 3 and 4 are really all about creating some solutions. Each stage will involve 3 steps. Working groups will be asked to undertake an activity. There'll be a consultation process, and then there's a deliverable at the end. So if you decide, hopefully you all will decide to put your hands up to be involved in this, but there is a time commitment. I'll talk about support later because we don't expect you to do this by yourselves, but we will require some of your time. We haven't been prescriptive about how the working groups or the planning group on governance, we did agree that the governance group should go ahead and start at the same time. Sorry, I was remiss in mentioning that. We haven't been prescriptive, though, about how those groups should work, but we do anticipate that they will need to meet regularly throughout the process. And then there are three really what we're calling milestone meetings. The first will be a kickoff meeting in December to review the process with the co-chairs and make sure that they're really clear about what needs to be done. We thought then it was going to be really important to have a check-in meeting, and we'd really like this to be in person. The reason that we've selected London is that we think it's important for key people from the Wellcome Trust to be able to attend, and that's going to be easier for them if we hold it in London. But this group will include the co-chairs, members of the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition, hopefully people from Wellcome, and our co-conveners. And then lastly, the really exciting bit will be the consensus meeting in June in Cape Town, which will also be in person and it will be funded. That's the intention. So key to this process being successful, we all felt really passionately about this, is consultation. And we think that that might happen in a couple of different ways. So we're hoping that all of the working groups will engage with people outside of the working groups. And we've referred to them as interest holders. I don't know if any of the authors are on the call today, but I've put a reference to the paper that we've used to inform our language at the bottom. But we're talking about groups or individuals who really have a legitimate interest and expertise, hopefully in the focus area of each working group. And then the idea is that there's opportunity also for open consultation. And so at the end of each stage, we will put the deliverables, the documents on the website for open consultation across the synthesis community, but also more broadly. So we're really hoping that this will be pushed out to lots of different groups and individuals. We will post the timing of those consultations right at the start of the process because it will only be open for a week, which we know is really tight. And we did have some feedback that's really not very long to get a decent consultation. But as I said at the start, we're working to a deadline that's been set for us and it's really tight. And so we've had to make some compromises. But if we publish the dates right at the start, then at least everybody will hopefully have them in their calendars and they'll be able to schedule time to participate. So again, just reinforcing that the credibility of this process and the final report that is developed is highly dependent on that consultation process. We also recognise that there's limited opportunity to be involved in the working groups. It's likely that there will only be 20 people per working group, including the co-chairs. So there's opportunity to put your hand up to be a co-chair. And we're really hoping that if you do that, that you are somebody that has really good facilitation skills. We think that that's really important. This is not necessarily about being the most important person in the room or the person who thinks they know the most about the particular area of interest, but about being able to facilitate a group of people, both the working group and more broadly, to contribute to this process. Obviously, you can put forward your name to be a group member, but there will be, as I said, an open consultation process, individual consultation. We will continue to have open meetings, and then there'll be people to support this process as well. So I'll come to that a little bit later. but we're trying to make sure that there are multiple avenues for people to engage with this work. And as I said before, we really remain committed to making the process as inclusive as possible. So stage one in our double diamond process is the discovery phase. And we've referred to it as what have we got? We're trying to use language that's as simple as possible. And this is aimed at building a really deep understanding of all of the capabilities that exist across the evidence synthesis ecosystem globally, because we're not starting from ground zero, and we know that. And I think that that's really important to emphasize here. There is a huge amount of work that's happened over several decades, and so we know that there is capability. That is at different levels of scale and complexity and maturity. But in this first phase, we just want you to think as broadly and widely as possible to come up with a list of systems, resources, processes that relate to evidence synthesis infrastructure. We need to keep emphasizing that this is about infrastructure. And that list will be put out for open consultation so that people can provide feedback and add to lists. And at the end, we hope that we will produce what we are referring to as a capability profile. The second phase relates to working out what we need. And so, as I said, those capabilities that get identified will be likely at different stages of maturity. And so what we would like groups to do, and as I mentioned at the start, we will provide templates for this work, but we want people to assess the level of maturity of the capabilities that have been identified. Equally importantly, perhaps more importantly, we also want people to start to think about where the gaps are. Where do we have no capability? Now, it might be that we're anticipating that in health, we've been doing this for much longer. And so there are capabilities that exist in health that perhaps don't exist in other sectors. And so that's one form of gap, but it might be that there are gaps that are across all sectors in relation to synthesis infrastructure. The third stage is what is referred to usually as the development phase, but it's really about where we start thinking about ideas and solutions that we might explore in more detail as we go forward. So what we're hoping that groups will do in this phase is to think about how we can enhance or strengthen existing capabilities. Now, the example that John Lavis gave me a couple of weeks ago was that Prospero exists, but it doesn't have sustainable funding. And so we have this capability, but we're not sure how long we're going to have it for. So that's one example. But equally, we want people to think about how we might resolve capability gaps that have been identified throughout the first two stages. Again, this will go out for open consultation. And at the end of it, we hope that what we have is a set of strong, well thought through, well-defined capabilities for each focus area for each group. But we also want to know what people think is going to make the biggest impact. So this is usually called the deliver phase. It's not exactly strictly the deliver phase in this process, but we'd like you to think about making some recommendations for consideration at our face-to-face meeting in Cape Town. So at this point, again, there'll be a template. We'd like people to work through what's called an impact effort matrix and try to determine or start to think about what could we do right now that would make a big impact? What might we think about doing next? And what can we wait to do until later? Once again, there'll be an open community consultation. And at the end of this phase, each working group should bring all of that work together in a final report that includes those 4 deliverables. We did have a question at the first meeting around the fact that some of this might be iterative and groups may feel that they need to go back and forth between stages a bit, and we accept that that's likely. We also accept that there will be moments in time because of the nature of this imperfect process where we might have to pivot and rethink as we go along. We also had a discussion, a lengthy discussion actually in London about the financial implications. We talked about doing some economic modelling, but we think that that was probably outside of the scope of this activity. And so at the very least, we think we need to have some costing done. And we intend to bring in a consultant with expertise to do that. It's likely that that will start during stage 3 as we start to formulate ideas and have an understanding of what might be coming. And this will form part of that final report that goes to the consensus meeting. We think at this point it might also be that once we've got a bit of a sense of the outputs of the working groups, we might be able to bring in consultants with expertise to help us work through issues related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We may be able to bring in consultants to help us think through monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and some of those issues that were included in the planning groups. So I know I said there are 4 stages and I've got 6. But really stage 5 and 6 are sort of the add-ons to the design process that help us get to the point we need to get to for the consensus meeting. Stage 6 really is about coming to consensus. Now, we also had a conversation with John Lavis the other night where we questioned the word consensus because we're realistic people and we don't believe that we are going to get more than 200 people in a room and have everybody agree on what the next steps should be for the global evidence synthesis community and the associated infrastructure. But we will do our best. But we're hoping that what we will be able to deliver after that is a fully costed description of what is needed and at what cost and when to help inform Wellcome and hopefully other funders to come along and support that work. This will not be without support. We know that it's a big ask. We know that this is a significant program of work that we're asking you to do. And so both on the facilitation group side, we think that we're going to need a little bit of support to help run this process, both at a management level and also an administrative level. And as I've mentioned, some consultants potentially to help us with economic analysis, but also for working groups. And again, I apologise for the language and I hope that this makes sense for people. But we think that, you know, we'll be able to have some research support and some administrative support. And at different time points, if groups decide that they think some specialist expertise is required, we're hoping to build all of that in. We've attempted to build all of that into a budget. There is a proposal being developed. The initial idea was that each of these contributing groups, so the Building a Global Evidence Synthesis Community group and the UN SDG Synthesis Coalition group, and the co-conveners of the event would develop separate concept notes, but those are now being consolidated by John Lavis into a single proposal for a planning award to go to Wellcome, which we're hoping will be submitted in the next couple of weeks. There are obviously no guarantees that Wellcome will fund this process. We are taking a calculated risk, and we feel relatively confident. But I think it's important to say that this is not a guaranteed pot of money for us to do this work. Sorry, it's morning and I've got an 8-year-old trying to get my attention. So next steps. We will have an expression of interest process that will start as of after this meeting. The forms will be available on the website. Again, I know this looks like a really tight time frame. It will be open for 2 weeks. Even Wellcome did suggest that that was a really tight time frame to have the expression of interest open. But what we said to them is whatever time we borrow at this end, we're going to pay for at the other end. And we really think that it's important to work as hard as we can pre-Christmas to get the group set up so that they can hit the ground running in January. Our hope is to announce the co-chairs and members by the 16th of December, and straight after that to meet with them in that kickoff meeting so that everybody's ready to go in January. I did say at the meeting last night or yesterday, I have an Aussie accent and I speak very quickly, and so rest assured, all of this will be available on the website for you to go back to, the slides, the recordings, and this timeline so that you can go back and have a look at it. I apologise, I try not to talk too quickly. So this will be available on the website hopefully from today or tomorrow. And as a reminder, this is the website. It's not a fancy website, but it does the job. It's got all of the documents, all of the presentations. It's got some translated content. Just to preempt a potential question, because we had it at the last meeting, we are committed to delivering future meetings in languages other than English. Obviously, that won't be me, but we've had some people volunteer to help us do that. We are also building into the budget some funding to support translation. Again, if we are truly committed to being inclusive and recognizing diversity, we know that that's something that's really important that has to happen. So I did say to Will yesterday or at the last meeting that if I got the privilege of presenting, he would have the privilege of fielding questions. So I'm going to hand over to Will, who I'm pretty sure has been monitoring the chat to field questions. Thanks, Will.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Really exciting to be part of this. Quieter chat this meeting than this morning. So if you've got questions or comments or thoughts, don't hold back. You know, we know this is a lot. We know it's not necessarily all clear. If you want to stick your hand up, the button at the bottom called react, and then there's an option raise hand, so we can see that you want to come in. And somebody has, that's Janice Tufter. So please do.
Oh, hi, I'm Janice Tufty, and I identify as a consumer, patient, whatever. I'm on the Global Evidence Commission and have served in guidelines and been involved with synthesis. And I don't know if there's many patients that are involved or if that's a plan. But more importantly, I was kind of considering how the work groups are going to be divided. If you have individuals that are kind of thinking about how we, which work group would be best to put us in.
That's a really great question. What we're going to do when we post the expressions of interest form, I think realistically tomorrow, I'm looking at my clock and it will be 9 p.m. when this meeting ends, so I don't want to overpromise. So realistically tomorrow is include explanations of what all the groups are. But it's really worth stressing that what the groups are is pretty open. There's AI, there's demand side engagement, there's data, there's capacity sharing, there's methods of process innovation, and there's governance. Where you take those groups when you're on those groups is up to you. All we're doing is creating a process, and then it's up to other people to lead it. So if you see a group and you have a feeling, look, there's a really important piece of work that should be done in this group, my response to that is please get involved and make that happen. Because we can't see round all the corners on this. We don't know how this is going to end, and it will be up to the people in the groups to make that happen. We will try to make it as clear as possible what we think those groups are about, but please take that as a starting point, not putting walls around what's possible, because we don't want to do that. And I will just say, one of the commitments we have here is to cross different sectors. So this is very specifically not just about health. So I take your reference to patients, and as earlier in my life, a very active user of health services, I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of that in a cross-sector capacity. That might be users, that might be consumers in lots of different senses, but the people who are ultimately affected. And ultimately, the whole purpose of this process is about making people's lives better. We absolutely want everyone involved to keep that focus.
So in this sense, it might be citizen scientist or global citizen, something like that. That's what we call ourselves. Okay. All right. Thank you. And I just thinking about how I suspect some of the groups, when I looked at them, a lot of people might be very interested in a couple groups, and some other groups might not be as much. And so I just want to say that perhaps there should be an opportunity for us to say we're open to other, placement in other groups or something.
There absolutely will be, yeah. And picking up also a comment that Tamara's just made in the chat, it's really important that what each group has is a variety of people with a variety of perspectives. And I'll use that hook to say, if you've looked at this process and thought that's really exciting, I'd love to be involved, but it's not really for people like me, please think the first half of that thought and not the second half. This absolutely will only work if a wide variety of people get involved, not the people who've already had leadership positions in these kinds of organizations. We want people from different backgrounds, different levels of experience, different perspectives on all of these questions to come together and do something new. And that's what we're hoping we can pull together. So the more people who volunteer, the better. I've got a question in chat that directly relates to this from Andrea Ordonez, and then I'll come to Julian Elliott, who has his hands up. How will the decision for the chairs be done? The answer is we don't actually know yet. The problem we have is the same problem we had when we held the first open meeting. We thought it was possible a couple of dozen people would turn up and we'd sit around and have a conversation. We planned for that. We planned for breakout groups. And then we ended up with 700 people signing up for a meeting, and that wasn't possible. We don't know how many people will volunteer, so it's really hard to define a decision-making process. What Carla, Zoe, and I are committing to doing is finding a decision process based on who puts themselves forward to try to get together a group of people that we can all recognize is genuinely broad, genuinely inclusive, and genuinely exciting. We will do that consulting with other people, including the demand side people like the UN SDG Synthesis Coalition, but we don't know exactly what that looks like. And we will explain as this goes along how to take that forward, but until we know what number of people we're dealing with, we don't know how to deal with that. And in particular, it's a tight time frame, not just for people to volunteer, but then to make a choice and actually get people going. So we need to think about how we can do things practically in that time frame. Julian and then Christian, have your hands up.
No, thanks, Will. You might have answered my question. I think at the first meeting there was a commitment to a globally diverse global steering group that would then choose the working groups. So it sounds like that's not going to happen anymore. I'm sure everyone would be very interested in the thinking why there's not going to be a steering group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not going to happen in that sense. And the reason is we couldn't come up with a plausible group that everybody would recognize was fairly selected. Ultimately, it would have been Carla, Zoe, and I just saying, here's a group of people we think should be on that group. And every way we tried to do that, we felt didn't work, and that people would justifiably ask, why not us or why not these people or whatever. But we also started to realize that the real leadership here will come from the co-chairs and the groups. The role that Carla, Zoe, and I doing, as Zoe explained, we think of it very much as a facilitation role. You've seen now the process that we've come together to design. I hope you can see that it's very open to where the groups choose to take it, and that it's not presuming anything about who will be involved or what they will choose to do beyond that. We're trying to create an open, equitable, and inclusive process and get people to think really broadly about things. We set up the process, do our best to attract good people to lead that, but then it is over to those people to lead it. And I think that's where the real action will be. So the challenge now moves to how do we get a really great group of co-chairs that are that broad. That's still a big challenge, but at least it's a challenge that's in the open. And in a way, the role of the facilitation group hopefully steps in the background of the co-chair step forward in the next, oh my goodness, few weeks. Carla and Zoe, do you want to add anything to that or correct me on any of that?
Nothing from me. I'm fine.
No, I think that reflects our thinking, Will.
Julian, is that okay?
I mean,
Back on that?
of thoughts, but I mean, I think there's a bit of disquiet about leadership from diverse settings. So I imagine you've taken that into account in the decision.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that this represents the what can we practically do in the time available. There is no perfect process, and we're not claiming this as a perfect process, but we hope that by facilitating the creation of these groups, which I don't think Zoe said explicitly, but none of us will be co-chairs of any of these groups. We're handing over the leadership of this process to other people at this stage. And I think that's the best we can do, or at least we felt it was the best we could do. And you're all welcome to your own opinions about that, but I hope everyone can at least see that this is a good faith effort to try and get an open and inclusive process going. Christian.
Oh, thank you. So let me just lower my hand. So, no, thank you, Will. And my question is just to better understand the more sort of nature and the scope of the work of the working groups. So in a way that will there be room for sort of technical inputs that will just be led by those working group, and then particularly, for example, thinking on piloting initiatives inside, will it be A, inside of the scope, and B, budget directly specifically for those type of activities?
Without knowing if you have a specific example in mind, I'm just thinking of a timetable, and I struggle to imagine people getting pilots up and running in the 4 weeks or 5 weeks we've allocated to each stage of this process. Technical input, absolutely. And, I think part of getting this process right is mixing what Janice talked about, the kind of end user and citizen perspective on things with the technical perspective on things, with the policymaker and senior decision maker perspective on things. We want to bring in all of those different kinds of inputs. And as Zoe said, we need co-chairs who are going to be excellent facilitators who are going to bring out all of those different contributions from the community. But in terms of can we get pilot projects up and running within these working groups or so on, I would imagine, very much again up to the groups what they choose to do, but I would imagine that won't be possible just simply because of the time frame. And there certainly isn't a budget kind of set aside to support pilot projects or anything like that. What we hope to see is the output of this work informing what people choose to do and what funders choose to support after this in terms of getting things going. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. And just in case anyone didn't see the answer in chat, if you are interested in more than one group, the form will let you choose up to 3 groups you might be interested in. And yep, any other questions? Or what have I missed in chat?
Will, there's a few questions in the chat. One from Malcolm that I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I think the absence of a transparent system of selection is perhaps worse than a transparent but wonky system. Maybe Malcolm, you want to give us some suggestions? We would be very welcome to hear what you have to say. We're trying very best to be transparent, but we realize that there are some limitations, and one of the limitations is to be pragmatic in terms of
I
people
realize
that
the
have
challenges in
the
trying to put
skills
together
and
a
the
process.
time.
I realize the challenges in trying to put together a process in such short order, but I was just struck by your saying you couldn't think of a process that would stand up, and so we weren't going to have a formal process. We were just going to try and decide, and I wonder whether there's some way of, and I also get that the skills that we're looking for from these leaders is very specific and particular to engendering the sort of conversations and deepening our understanding of where the issues lie, that we can start to articulate something so that in Cape Town we've got something that's really good. So I get all of that, and it's really difficult. But I think there's something around about if there are conflicting ideas of what might end up in the report from Cape Town, and no surprises, but with this much potential investment in evidence synthesis on the table, there's quite likely to be a number of competing visions of how that might be best applied. Then I think if that process has been driven from the beginning by working groups, the leadership of which were appointed by a small, forgive me, cabal, or small group of people that were operating in that way, then the whole process can potentially unravel. And I wonder if there's some way of, for instance, you might, and this isn't a suggestion, but could you just say to the 700 odd people who've been on the call, we looked at all of these applications, and these are the people who we've nominated for these roles. As a community, do we endorse these? Because if you get that endorsement at the beginning, and it might take a day or two, then I think that adds to the legitimacy of the entire process. And if you don't have that endorsement, you potentially end up with blood on the carpet. Well, I think you will have some blood on the carpet in Cape Town, but you'll have less blood on the carpet if the process has been, if we've bought into the process at every step. I'm desperately trying not to be difficult. People know me, that's my usual modus operandi, but I'm trying to.
Thanks, Malcolm. That's actually a really helpful thing. And I think one way or another, we know that this can only be successful if the group of people that comes out of it is credible to the whole community. I don't think we thought about quite formally ratifying it in that sense, but it's a really, really interesting thought. I'm not going to make any immediate commitments. I think that would need a discussion, obviously, but I think I just want to emphasize, absolutely, there will be people who start this process with a sense of what the outcome ought to be. And I respect that. There are a lot of people on this call and beyond who have spent literally decades in this field. I joined Campbell a year ago, so I have a very limited, history and kind of perspective on it. But, there are people who really have given this a lot of thought and, seen previous versions of these conversations and all the rest of it. However, as Zoe was explaining, the process we tried to create is really inviting people to go in with an open mind and to think about all of the possibilities of what we have that's good already and how that can be built on, and all of the different ways that can be built on, and then what to prioritize within that. And I think that's really important. I personally would be really happy if a working group says, look, there are 3 different ways we could take this forward. And there are genuine disagreements between this working group as to what we would take forward. And here are the reasons. I don't think it has to be about coming up with a single right answer. It's about helping the community and the people who want to support this community have better conversations. So we'll take that away about the process and think about that. I think it's a really important point of how do we validate that this is a group of people that the community recognizes as worthwhile investing this time with. And on the other side, please don't think that this is kind of go in with a closed mind. We're really looking for the people who will come in with an open mind, and I know there are lots of people who want to do that. A quick question about the form on providing expressions of interest. I haven't looked at it yet. One of my next jobs is to type it into Google Forms, which gives you a sense of what the facilitation group actually looks like in practice. But I haven't looked at the latest draft. But essentially, I think we're going to give you a short box, I think about 100 words, to say what your relevant experience is. So we're not looking for people to submit massive academic CVs or anything. We are well aware that none of us will actually know most of the people who express interest, and that's one of the complexities about how do you run a selection process. Because we want cross sectors, cross regions, and so on, it can't be based on who knows who. And so it's going to be very difficult, and we may just have to look at what responses we get to that initial expressions of interest and then do something after that. But the initial form will be very short and simple, some demographic information so we can understand something about, are we getting balanced participation, 100 words on what's your relevant experience, and then which groups up to 3 are you interested in participating in. Is that right, Carla and Zoe?
Yeah, absolutely. But Andrea has put a comment in the chat. Do you already have a sense of the representation gaps from participation on the calls in terms of geographies, expertise, etc., so that the current community could potentially reach out to others from those spaces? I think we're very conscious that the people that have participated on the calls to date have been largely from the health sector. And so we are very, very keen if you know of people from outside of health, absolutely be encouraging people who perhaps haven't engaged yet with these meetings to put their names forward if you think that they're appropriate. Absolutely.
And worth saying, I'll be in China in a couple of weeks' time and hoping to hold a Chinese language meeting about this. In the call earlier, we have volunteers that organize meetings in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So there is genuinely a kind of upswell of support for making this genuinely global and multilingual in terms of the outreach for this. And I think that's really encouraging. So in terms of language, that's been a big barrier. What I can say, I did a very quick search through the spreadsheet of the initial signups to the first meeting, and I think just under 1 in 5 mentioned any affiliation to either Cochrane, Campbell, or JBI. So 4 out of 5 people mentioned no affiliation to any of the 3 organizations that kicked this process off. So I think there is some breadth involved in this, which is exciting, but the thing I'm most worried about is the people who assume that this process isn't for them, it must be for other people to do. So if you are an early career researcher or you're not the world's biggest methodologist or whatever, please don't assume that you don't have something to contribute. If you're interested, put yourself forward.
There's also a question from Tari about the connection between this program of work with the work being done by the UN SDG Synthesis Coalition. And I think it's important to say that we've had several meetings with members of the coalition. We've shared our concept notes. We know what each other is doing. And so it's very much connected. So just to reassure people that that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very, very excited about this initiative. Harry, your hand is up.
Thanks, Zoe, and apologies. I'm sitting in the car in the rain, so my audio is bad. Thanks, Zoe, that's helpful. My question is more about from the working group phase onwards, as those groups get underway and start to explore and design what the system might look like and what we need. How will align that work with the work of the UN SDG Synthesis Coalition and the needs that they're describing that system should ultimately deliver on?
Well, you might get bored of this answer, but that will be up to the co-chairs and the groups. there's a limit to how much we can prescribe that, obviously. But the Synthesis Coalition will be, I hope, encouraging people to put themselves forward to take part in the groups. So I hope that we'll have people who are part of the various management committees and other parts of the SDG Synthesis Coalition actually joining in those groups and taking part that way. As Zoe said, every group will be encouraged to identify interest holders and consult with them. And we'll definitely be asking the SDG Synthesis Coalition to make people available to take part in those consultations and conversations. Um, and so I hope there's a lot of room for dialogue around there. And also really encourage people to think about who else other than the SDG Synthesis Coalition sits in a similar or equivalent role who we ought to be trying to engage in the same way. And I'm just going to pick up a question that James Thomas asked in chat. Um, in order to facilitate that dialogue, we want to provide a full-time researcher to support each group. The idea behind that is so that there is somebody who can run around after people getting their input, rather than people who have input having to run around after the groups trying to be heard. So we hope giving full-time support to each group will be helpful. And on top of that, some administrative and secretariat support behind those to keep the process running smoothly, draft the documents, reports, etc., etc. So we're trying to keep, if you like, the legwork off the backs of the people who are volunteering their time as co-chairs and group members as much as possible, and leave you to use your time for what you can uniquely do, which is bring your expertise and your different perspectives through the process. That's the hope. Who's next?
There was a question before from James asking for clarification about administrative support. So James, we're putting together a planning grant. We understand that the timelines are quite tight. So with support, both in terms of a program management and admin support for meetings, etc., but also hopefully a researcher that will work with each one of the working groups, one FTE per working group, to support the development of activities. And we are suggesting that this researcher, if possible, should be an early career, so someone that also will get the advantage of learning from this process and sharing a different perspective. So obviously, as Zoe mentioned on her presentation, there is no guarantee that we receive the funds. We're just looking now at working with Wellcome to identify this. And there is also a very good point from Juan Franco asking whether there are any plans to manage commercial conflict of interest, especially for those developing products related to evidence synthesis. I think it might be something that we might need to ask in our expression of interest. And thank you very much, Juan. This is a very good point.
Yeah, that form just got longer, so thank you very much. But it's an important question, and we'll pick it up. We don't plan, obviously, to create a massive heavyweight new process, but we do need to make sure, again, that we come up with a group of people that's credible to the whole community and to the people who will ultimately use this work.
And a good point from Shiv responding to Tari. Tari, I don't know if you want to comment and you have any other, if this is, Shiv just clarified better the relationship. I would say that, you know, the focus of working closely with the SDG coalition is exactly to, you know, to respond to the needs. It's not the only demand side, but they are certainly the most important demand side for this process.
And it's worth saying, because I don't think he's as famous as he should be, Shiv is a member of the SDG Synthesis Coalition's leadership group and works at the United Nations Development Programme. So Shiv, if you want to step in and say anything, now's your moment.
I thought he was famous, but that was
But
my...
famous in my heart, but maybe not yet in Hollywood. Shiv.
Yeah, no, thanks. You're pushing my ego here. Yeah, I mean, I think I commented in chat, but just to say that the coalition has been involved really closely in all steps of this process, and I think I've outlined 3 ways in the chat, that kind of obvious ways in which alignment will happen. So, we'll be thinking about who from the coalition and from other UN evaluation agencies can represent in the different working groups. And then, as a coalition, we have this sort of structure around the 5 SDG pillars, and each of those pillars has been identifying priorities kind of based on priorities and frameworks within the UN, as well as sort of evaluative evidence out there, assessments of that. So those priorities could be reflected, perhaps that's a little further down the line. And then throughout this process, we're sort of acting as that bridge, that mechanism for linking with the demand side engagement at different kind of layers of the UN decision-making system. So those are 3 obvious ways. Some of them are more sort of short-term, and maybe that third point is a bit more longer term. But yeah, we're still discussing this, but we'll be there and contributing and to this process. Yeah, thanks.
And it's worth saying how much the SDG Synthesis Coalition has done to inspire people to get involved in this. I think it was a really inspiring initiative. When I first found out about it, I was hugely excited. And Wellcome made their announcement of support for the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative, as they called it, at an SDG Synthesis Coalition event at UN headquarters. So they've clearly caught their imagination as well. And it's really exciting to do something that could benefit billions of people's lives ultimately. Julian Elliott asks about the time commitment. We're not being specific. Different co-chairs may handle this in different ways. As we've said, we want to make sure that there's enough support to make this feasible for a wide range of people. Part of that support needs to include financial support, particularly for people in lower resource settings. So we are obviously, that's dependent on funding, but if there is funding available, there will be stipends available. I'm not sure if we can be more specific about that yet, but obviously I'm very conscious that that will affect people's ability to take part. So subject to us being able to say anything more concrete, for now what I will say is if you would like to take part and your taking part is dependent on there being some level of financial support, please do put yourself forward and say that. We might adapt the form to make that possible, because our goal very much is to be able to make sure that people's time is compensated.
Can I
And
just add, Julian, the commitment is we are running a process that depends that each stage is finalized. The first 2 stages is finalized within 4 weeks, each one. So 4 weeks for stage 1, 4 weeks for stage 2, and for stage 3 and 4, 5 weeks. So it is a commitment, and we don't underestimate that, because so that's why we attempt to put, and obviously, as Will said, this is subjected to approval, so we can't guarantee 100%, but we attempted to put a structure on which there is going to be enough support for the working groups, so that the co-chairs or the members don't feel that they have to do all the work on their own. So the main issue, the main importance of the working groups is really to be able to bring their thinking, to be able to consult with others, but they're going to be support to develop reports, to facilitate the meetings, etc. So that's our intention. I mean, none of this is guaranteed at the moment, of course, but we are working towards, because the commitment is intense, to be able to deliver this report by June. And as Zoe mentioned before, this is a request from the funders. We had to be pragmatic, but also making sure that there is, and we are also very keen to create templates and facilitating the reports, and also to identify report writers that would then put this information together. So the thinking is the working group, but they're going to be support to provide the outcomes and deliverables.
For what it's worth, when I was thinking about it, speaking for no one else, I imagine that the co-chairs might take a couple of days a week on this, and the group members might take half a day a week on this, but your mileage might vary, and different groups might vary, and so on. We've got 1 minute left. If there are any other burning questions, now's your moment. But I'm going to look to Carla and Zoe to see if they have any final thoughts or comments.
Nothing more from me. Just thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for your feedback and your engagement. It's really important for us to hear all of this so that we can continue to use that to refine what we're doing. So thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks from me as well. I think it's we're just starting a long journey, so please feel free to reach out to any of us if you want more clarification, or if you feel that your question has not been answered. We're here, to support this process.
Absolutely. If you go to the website evidencesynthesis.wiki, and the link is in the chat somewhere, all the details of the previous meetings are there. Details of this meeting will be there tomorrow, and the expressions of interest form will be sent out via the mailing list ASAP and on that website. You can sign up for the mailing list on that website. You can also send anonymous comments and questions, or comments and questions with your name on, through the form that's linked to on that website. I'm really excited that we're having these conversations, that we're trying to do something this ambitious and this collaborative and this global together as a community. And it's really great that so many people want to be involved. We know it can't be done perfectly, but we're really excited to see so many people trying to make it be done well. So thank you, Carla, for posting the link. Thank you all for coming. And in the words of a great Jerry Springer, until next time, be good to yourselves and each other. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.